Building a home for Hashem on earth is a process in 3 stages, as we shall see from the Zohar on this week's parasha. In Zohar Parashat Zayin Shteit, the story in our parasha tells us as when the Aron is gekommen limekomo of dem even hashasiyah, that when the Aron came to its rightful place, which is on that stone from which the whole world was formed in Yerushalayim, Pasach Aron Omar, the Aron announced, Zois menuchasi adiad, this is my permanent place of rest. Poi eshev, here I shall stay, ki ibisiha, because I have yearned for this place. Rabbi Yesa says, Hai Kra, this same pasuk wasn't said by the Aron, but rather Knesset Yisrael Amrele. It was the Jewish people who said it. And they, the Jewish people, said it at the time the Beis Hamikdash was built, same time as the original opinion said, but different people, not the Aron speaking, but the Jewish people celebrating the Aron's arrival in its place. Whereas Rabbi Chizkiah has a totally different view. It's actually the Eibishter speaking, and he's talking about the Jewish people. When Eden tun dem Ratzon von Eibishter, when the Jewish people do what the Eibishter wants, then the Eibishter is sitting on his throne of glory, and he takes compassion or care for the world. And what is found throughout the whole world is bracha and peace and cherishment. And that's when the Eibishter says, here is my place of rest for all time. So, your first glance at this is, there are 3 opinions which form 2 groups. The first 2 versions, either that the Aron is speaking or the Jewish people are speaking, fits with the pshat of the pasuk. Because the pasuk sounds as if it is speaking about the Aron when it arrived at its final resting place in Yerushalayim. Says no, was like the erste day hat the Aron gesagt, the only difference between the 2 opinions is who was speaking, but when they were speaking is the same. It's when the Aron came to Yerushalayim. So the first opinion is the Aron said Zois menuchasi, whereas Rabbi Yesa says it was actually the Jewish people speaking. So they form one group. The event happened at the time that the Aron came to Yerushalayim. Whereas, like the dritte day, according to the third Rabbi Chizkiah's opinion, the pasuk and the story don't necessarily align, because when the Aron is gekommen in Kodesh HaKadoshim, the pasuk is talking about when the Aron came into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, whereas, according to Rabbi Chizkiah, it's actually the Eibishter speaking across the span of history when the Jewish people do what the Eibishter wants. So that's not so simple to come to terms with, because the third opinion is not linked to the Mishkan, the Beis Hamikdash, the Aron coming to its place, which is Teichen Ha'inin in Zohar, which is what the Zohar is speaking about. Surely the Zohar did not have to quote this particular opinion in this particular conversation. There are surely many other unrelated explanations of the pasuk Zois menuchasi adiad, which the Zohar obviously doesn't quote because they're not on topic. So why that one? Furthermore, when you look at the first 2 psukim, the first 2 opinions, then it makes sense as the Chelek is nit nor wer gesagt Zois menuchasi adiad. They're only debating who was speaking. Was it the Aron speaking or the Yidden speaking? Especially when you consider what the Zohar said to introduce this topic, which is that the beauty and the appearance of the world the beauty of the world was not yet apparent until the Mishkan was built and the Aron came into the Mishkan. Now, the things we're talking about over here are when the Aron gets to Yerushalayim, but the Zohar introduces it by saying that the full beauty of the world was only manifest when the Aron came into the Mishkan. Okay? And from that time and on, then the great beauty and appearance, the so-called form of the world was complete, and you could see it in the Mishkan, you could see it in the Aron. And that's in the Mishkan, where the beauty of the Aron was, until eventually it came to the ultimate place, which is beloved to the Eibishter, the place of Yerushalayim, described, of course, in the Zohar as the Eben Shasiyah. And then here we get to the part that we've started our quotation with. When the Aron eventually came to the Eben Shasiyah in Yerushalayim, then the Aron made its statement, So, Oib Rabbi Yesa kommt sagen, as nicht der Aaron hat das gesagt. Nach Knesset Yisrael. So, what doesn't seem to make sense over here is, if all Rabbi Yesa is changing is who spoke, not when or why, he could have just simply said, Hai Kra Knesset Yisrael Amrele. That's a pasuk that was said not by the Aaron, but by the Yidden. But von dem was is Keifel, he doesn't do that. He repeats words we've already seen. At the time the Beis Hamikdash was built, and the Aaron came to its designated place, that implies that Rabbi Yosef is telling us more than just who is speaking. Not mit dem Zman dies Bone bei Makdasha. Rabbi Yosef is highlighting for us that it's not just when the Aaron gets to its designated location, then this pasuk is said, in his version, by the Jews, but he's saying there's something unique that happens when the Beis Hamikdash is built, and we've got to identify what is he telling us. Das says, in other words, the Chelek von die drei Deis is say, Veres hat gesagt, so the obvious distinction between the three opinions is who's speaking, who's saying this pasuk. The Aaron, according to the first opinion, it's the Aaron itself. Knesset Yisrael, according to Rabbi Yesa, it's the Jewish people. Other Kuchabrich, according to Rabbi Chizkiah, it's Hashem speaking. But not only that, but the three-way debate over here is also in respect of what was this pasuk referred or used. If you go with the first opinion, it's when the Aaron got to be on the Even Shasiyah, then the pasuk was said. So that's the significance, the Even Shasiyah. Or according to Rabbi Esa's Zman Beis Hamikdash, it's when the Beis Hamikdash was built. That's when this pasuk is relevant. Or according to Rabbi Chizkiah, Zman Yisrael Abdin Rusei, whenever the Yidden do what the Eibishter wants, which could theoretically be a whole span of times. So in that case, we have to understand Aleph. What is the reason behind the difference of opinion between the two first opinions, who are both effectively saying the same thing? When the Beis Hamikdash was built and the Aaron comes, that's when the pasuk is said. Seeing as both of those opinions apparently are addressing the same time period, when the Aaron came to its place in Yerushalayim, so what is the relevance of who's speaking? There's got to be something that motivated those two opinions. Why one opinion says it's the Aaron saying the pasuk, and the other says it's the Eden saying the pasuk. Well, what is it that's motivating those two opinions? And secondly, Beis, remember, the introduction to this entire piece was the Zohar telling us that until the Aaron came into the Mishkan, there wasn't that beauty in the world. Well, according to the first opinion, the pasuk is only relevant when the Aaron gets to the Beis Hamikdash. So why are we talking about the Mishkan? Seeing as the pasuk is only stated when the Aaron enters the Beis Hamikdash, why even get onto the subject of the Aaron being in the Mishkan beforehand, even by way of introduction to this? So the explanation is the Chelek zwischen die drei Deis is was is the Iker ha'inyan im Mishkan und Mikdash. The first thing that we should identify as the difference between these three opinions is that each one is focusing on, well, what is the epicenter of the Beis Hamikdash? What's it all about? The Dei ha'alef, the first view, which says it's the Aaron, is Bilashon Haramban. Well, that would fit with the language the Ramban uses, which is Ikar Achefetz Mishkan Hu, that the primary focus of the Mishkan is Mekoy Menuchas HaShechina. It should be a place where the Shechina can be manifest. And where is that Shehu Ha'aron? The Aaron. So the first opinion in the Zohar says, when the Aaron declared, when the Aaron came to the Eben HaShasiyah. On the river, if the Aaron is the most important feature of the Beis Hamikdash, it makes sense that the Aaron is the one speaking and saying, I'm now where I belong. Whereas the Das Rabbi Yesa, the Ikoinin from Mishkan and Mikdash, Rabbi Yesa says, no, hang on a second, that's actually not what the focus of the Beis Hamikdash is, but rather, actually the purpose of the Mishkan and the Beis Hamikdash is to have a place where the Jewish people go to serve the Eibishter. And that's Belashon HaRambam. That fits with the Rambam's Shita, which is by Smuchan Yos Makrivim by Akarbonis, that the mitzvah is to have a designated place where we go to bring offerings to Hashem, and to make pilgrimage to celebrate there 3 times a year. That's why Rabbi Yosef says, when is it that this pasuk is relevant? When the Beis Hamikdash is built, because now you have a place where the Jews can serve Hashem. On the Faris Knesset Yisrael Amra, which will also explain why Rabbi Yosef says it's the Jews who are saying this pasuk, because it's relevant to them. They now have a place to serve the Eibishter. And das Reb Chizkiah, whereas Reb Chizkiah holds is the Ikar Inyan for Mishkan or Mikdash, the primary purpose of the Mishkan of the Beis HaMikdash is V'shachanti b'soicham, that the Eibishter should be with us. Die Menucha von dem Eibishter ist verbunden damit, was Sheichen zwischen und in Eden. So what is the goal of the Eibishter? Not just to have a building which is designated to serve him, but that it can be with us, amongst us, live with us, so to speak. On the river, Israel, and therefore his view is that's the Eibishter speaking, and he's speaking specifically about the context of the Jewish people doing what the Eibishter wants, so that the Eibishter could be with him. Now that makes a lot of sense. We're looking from three perspectives: the Aron, the Avoida, or the Yidden being the key component of the Beis HaMikdash. But remember that generally in Torah, opinions that seem to disagree are actually aligned, and especially in Pnimiyas HaTorah. Because we know that even when there are different opinions, they're all valid versions of Torah, the Eibishter's word, and especially in our circumstance, we're talking about opinions that are quoted in the Zohar, where the distinction between Pnimiyas HaTorah and Gemara, for example, is that there are no major questions and there's no debate. As the Shleima, as Mara Machoda, or Mara Machoda V'Lapligi, we have to say that all three of these opinions don't in any way disagree with each other. They're actually all illustrating phases of a process. Das heißt, nicht nur as alle drei Dinge seinen Emes, was sie seinen alle do in Mikdash. So it's not just to say, okay, they all have validity, all three opinions have relevance about something to do with the Beis HaMikdash. But rather, every one of these three views is absolutely essential to the Beis HaMikdash. But each one is essential at a different phase of the process of manifesting godliness in the world through the Beis HaMikdash, which we will now explain. And in order to explain that, we're going to look at three key chapters of the story of Hashem's home on earth. When you look at the unfolding of the Beis HaMikdash, there are three major time periods which relate to three major themes. First is HaMishkan in the desert. Then Beis HaMikdash Yerushalayim, the fact that there was a Beis HaMikdash in Yerushalayim built by humans, which is Aleph Beis, the first and second Beis HaMikdash. And then the third component is Beis HaMikdash Diriosid by Shlishi, the third Beis HaMikdash, which is in the Messianic age built by Hashem. We're going to link that in to the very well-known teaching of our sages about the beginning of our parasha, which says, Pekudei Mishkan, this is the audit of the Mishkan, Mishkan ha'edus, and then it repeats again the same word, Mishkan, immediately afterwards, Mishkan, Shnei Piyamim. Very famously, Chazal tell us why is it Mishkan twice in one pasuk right at the beginning of the parasha. Remes leMikdash shenismashken b'shnei churbanin. So Chazal tell us it's because it's alluding to the fact that the Beis HaMikdash was taken from us as a mashkoin, as collateral, as a security on two different occasions when the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. Now that shows us, as the pasuk read, that this is a pasuk which is speaking about Aleph and Mikra Yotzim Dei Pshuta, the simplest way to understand the pasuk, which is unavoidable, Wegen de Mishkan. It's actually talking about the Mishkan itself. On Beis, at the same time, it's Beremes Veged Mishkan Shenis Mashken. It's talking about the two Batei Mikdash which were taken from us and held as security against our behavior in preparation for Mashiach. So that's referring to the next phase, which is the two Batei Mikdash built by humans in Yerushalayim. Over Meire, and of course, they're held as security until when? Till the time of Mashiach, which is when we'll get the third Beis HaMikdash. So clearly, this pasuk is talking about the Mishkan, the two Batei Mikdash, and the future Beis HaMikdash of Mashiach's times. Look at the words. The fact that this pasuk chooses to allude to the fact that the Beis HaMikdash would be destroyed on two occasions by using the word mashkan, which is a deposit or security, is movanas churban is nit as Beis HaMikdash rishon v'sheni. The pasuk is a dakelu l'mrames ke'echad. So it's not saying that the two Batei Mikdash, which our pasuk is pretty much incorporating into a single word, Remez leMikdash shenismashken b'shnei churbanin, as the language of Chazal goes, one Mikdash which was taken twice as security through its destruction. So the indication is not that vet chas v'shalom bottle vern. There's no indication in this pasuk that the Beis HaMikdash would, God forbid, be neutralized. Nor as is an anoifim from mashkoin. This pasuk is emphasizing for us that the Beis HaMikdash is taken as security to be held for a future occasion. Am Maschken geht heraus von der Schussleibung und befindet sich beim Malve zeitweilig. How does a mashkin work? The debtor loses this item to the creditor temporarily. But the whole principle of a mashkin is the debtor gets it back at some point. That's the message for us about the Beis Hamikdash. Yes, we witnessed physical destruction of the Beit Hamikdash, and that would give us the impression that maybe, God forbid, they'd been taken from us. Therefore, Chazal clarified they're not taken from us long term, temporarily held as a security until an appropriate time. And that's going to be returned to us in the format of a third eternal Beis Hamikdash. So now that we know that there are these three time frames which speak to three themes of what the Beis Hamikdash is all about, Mishkan, Beit Hamikdash made by humans, and the Beis Hamikdash of Mashiach, let's look at what the distinction between these three phases and historical chapters are. The Chelek von die drei Inyanim Mishkan, Mikdash, ohne Mikdash dili Asis, the difference is as follows. In Mishkan hat sich aufgetan beikar l'chol roish. What the Mishkan achieved, which had never happened before, is the Menuchas HaShechina Shehu HaOren, a place that is a place that is settled for the Shechina to be manifest in a specific location, and that, as we described, is related to the Oren. Was is free given before the Mishkan, such a concept did not exist. Not only that, noch the Menuchas von dem Oren is in an open kavur is given beikar Mishkan. In fact, if the Aron is supposed to be the place where the divine presence is manifest, that occurred in the Mishkan in a more permanent way than in the Beit Hamikdash. Why? Because for the Aron is given Mishkan. In the context of the Mishkan, as long as there was a Mishkan, there was an Aron, and therefore there was this manifestation. Masha Inken in the Beit Hamikdash, whereas the Beit Hamikdash didn't have this. Because in Mikdash Sheni is the Aron Milchatchila need given. The second Beis Hamikdash had no Aron at all, so this element was absent completely. On a Mikdash Rishon is the Aron need given calls man shoyakayim, Baba saves man gonza yoshio. And even the first Beis Hamikdash, towards the end of its lifespan, the Aron was removed and hidden and was not present in the way that it should be. So if you're looking from the perspective of the Aron, the Mishkan is the gold standard of where the Aron manifests divine presence. That's if you're looking from the perspective of the Aron. But if you're looking at permanence and permanence of divine presence, well, then it actually works the exact opposite way around. Because the Mishkan didn't have a sense of permanence. It was packed and stored and traveled from place to place. That's why we call it a tent, to indicate its temporary nature. It's not a place where you could say there is a stable, sustainable, long-term divine presence. In the Beit Hamikdash, which you could, however, say about the Beit Hamikdash. They were structured in a single place that remains holy even in the absence of that actual building. The Beis Beit Hamikdash but the downside of the Beit Hamikdash is they were not permanent structures, evidenced by the fact that we don't have them today. And they were taken from us. Despite the fact that the space is still holy, the fact is the Beis Hamikdash is not there. And that would be the advantage of the Beis HaShlishi, of the third Beis Hamikdash, of Betzayna Binyan Nitzchi. That will be a permanent Beis Hamikdash. So, value of the Mishkan is the Aron is there from start to finish and manifests the Shechina in that way. Value of the two Beit Hamikdash is they are in a permanent space and therefore bring holiness to a permanent space, but they do not last permanently, and that's what the third Beit Hamikdash will fill in. It will be an eternal building. With that in mind, let's go back to these three opinions in the Zohar. The first opinion, which is the Aron is speaking and saying, yes, I've arrived at my eternal place of rest. That is immediately after the Zohar introduced the Mishkan and how the Aron came into the Mishkan. Because if you're looking from the perspective of the Aron, the champion of Aron tuning of divine presence into this world is in the Mishkan. Because the kind of presence of Shechina which is related to the Aron, the first time it ever happened was in the Mishkan, and the way that it happened with the most permanence was in the Mishkan. But we do, as noted, realize that the building itself, the Mishkan itself, is not a permanent structure, and therefore is not a permanent manifestation of godliness. And therefore, if you look through our eyes as Jewish people, so and you look at where are we visiting the Eibishter, as long as there's a Mishkan, we actually tell the Jewish people, you have not yet arrived at a place of rest, a place of permanence, because it wasn't permanent, it was packed up and moved to the next location. So the zweite day on Zayah is the Mutuba wegen dem Zman HaMikdash, whereas Rabbi Yesa says, let's look at the period when the Batei Mikdash stood. And those are the words that Rabbi Yesa says. It's not repeating things we've already heard. He's defining his opinion. When the Batei Mikdash were built and the Aron came to its place, the emphasis here being there is now a permanent location for divine presence. And now we are fulfilling the requirement of the Pasuk that we get to that place that is our inheritance and the long-term resting place of the Shekhinah. Now we have a place that is permanently allocated as where the Jews should come for the ultimate service of Hashem. As the Rambam says very clearly, from the moment that Shlomo HaMelech built the Mikdash in Yerushalayim, you are not permitted to build any replica of it or any version of it elsewhere. And there you see the Rambam telling us, from that time and on, this is the only place that can house the Shekhinah. This is the only place that we call the Jewish place of bringing offering to Hashem, and therefore it's Zois Menuchasi Adayad. And the Dita Deyaretzich Al Kol Panim Merumas. Whereas the third opinion, Rabbi Chizkiah, is maybe not saying it clearly, but certainly alluding to when Shleimus the Beis Hamikdash vegan Beis Hamikdash Akimon to the Asid, he's talking about the ultimate version of the Beis Hamikdash, which will be manifest in the third Beis Hamikdash. Interesting, because he doesn't say those words. So how do we know it? Because in the time of Mashiach, which is obviously a time that the Jewish people are serving the Eibishter in the most perfect way, as he says, when the Jewish people do ultimately what the Eibishter wants, then the result will be a Beis Hamikdash which is permanent. A Beis Hamikdash that can never be, God forbid, taken away from us. In that context, Rabbi Chizkiah tells us that the Eibishter says about the Jewish people, this is my permanent place. From the Ashra von dem Eibishter zwischen Niden is in an Eifem von Menuchasi Adead, Amenucho v'nachla nitzchis begiloi. Because the whole purpose of the manifestation of Shekhinah into the world is to be with the Jewish people, and here's where you're going to see that that manifestation is long-term, is eternal, and in a way that is open and clear for everybody to see. So Kashevi das is when again the Mishkan, Beis Hamikdash Alav Beis and Beis Shlishi, as the Zayin Nik came Bazunde in Yonim no ein in vehemshach. So now that we have clarified that the Mishkan to the period of the two Batei Mikdash to the future Beis Hamikdash of Mashiach is actually one continuum. So then we can understand the mitzvah lashon yachid von Basin Mikdash hat sich angegeben hatem kein gewen bebinyan am Mishkan. So basically we can understand then that the instruction to make a home for me started at the Mishkan. And was then continued through Shlomo HaMelech building the first Beis Hamikdash and Ezra and Nehemiah taking the Eden back to build the second Beis Hamikdash. And then eventually, and that will all come to its ultimate culmination in the third Beis Hamikdash with Mashiach, Emetz Hashem, very soon. The Zohar is not only telling us these three phases of the development of a home for Hashem on this earth, but it's linking them specifically to three particular elements, and we have to unpack what they are. How the divine presence rests in the context of the Aron, Beis Hamikdash Knesset Yisrael, the Beis Hamikdash as a place where the Yidden serve, and therefore the Yidden speaking, and Kutchabrichu, the Eibishter's voice. They are not three unrelated chapters of Jewish history. It is one continuum, and we need to understand what that continuum is. So to understand that, we're going to focus in on what Rabbi Chizkiah said, the third opinion in the Zohar. There is two things about what he said. Aleph Mairich, he adds many words that perhaps we didn't think had to be there. That when that happens, that they didn't do what the Eibishter wants, the Eibishter sits on his throne of glory, and he cares about the world, and there's bracha, peace and goodness, belovedness for everything or everyone. Why do we need all that information? And the second thing is, really, why should it be relevant to our conversation, which is about the Beis Hamikdash? What's the difference? What happens to the world? It actually sounds like what's the Eibishter speaking about? There, amongst the Jewish people, is my permanent residence. Where in the pasuk is there any indication, even in the words of Rabbi Chizkiah originally, that the Eibishter is talking about his relationship with the world, and yet he plugs it in and he says there's going to be bracha, b'shalom, and all these things for the whole world. So the explanation is this. The first thing that we read about is the Aron speaking and saying, this is my place. What's the Aron representative of? It's the Avodah from Torah Kemuvan. Obviously, the Aron represents Torah. That's the Koloin Shel Aron. That's what the Aron is all about. Ein be'Aron rak shnei luchos. So Avonim, as the pasuk tells us, the only thing inside the Aron is the luchos, which is the core of Torah. And the Shleimus from Torah is. So what's the ultimate state of Torah? Is b'shas the Esek HaTorah is an anofen for menucha, and as I only talking Yolam and Mevalbalim, the ultimate state of learning Torah is without issues, without distraction, without pressures, without stress. As the Gemara famously tells us, who received the Torah originally? People who ate man. In other words, they had no stress in their life. As the Rebbe has noted numerous times, in order to truly absorb and understand Torah properly, we have to be free of stress. And that's the great promise. Then in the time of Mashiach, we won't have any of that stress, and therefore, Ladasas Hashem Bilbad will be completely focused on learning Torah and understanding the Eibishter. Now, when a person does learn Torah as they're meant to, is God the limud shemevri de maisa. The greatness of Torah is that it will translate into action. Torah kommt darop in maisa mitzvahs und poilt as dozel sein b'shleimus. So what Torah does is it filters down into the behavior that we do. We do mitzvahs, and not just mitzvahs, we do them in the best way possible. Was damit tut sich auf der Birnenwelt. When we do mitzvahs properly, we actually end up refining and elevating the world. And that is all highlighted by building a Beis Hamikdash. In other words, the objective of building the Beis Hamikdash is to create a permanent physical structure on earth that accommodates the essence of Hashem. That's when, as the expression goes in the Zohar, when the Beis Hamikdash is built, then the Aron gets to its place. In other words, when is Torah in its place? When it's creating a permanent fixture of godliness in the world. When that happens, when the Beis Hamikdash is built, then the Yidden say this is our place of permanent manifestation of godliness. In other words, means the Jewish people are also in a state of menucha, in a state of rest. Why? Because there is no better position to be in that is more restful, that is more calm, that is more fulfilling, that is more resonant than doing what I was created to do. I was created to serve the Eibishter. And how do I do so? By fulfilling what the Eibishter wants, which is Torah mitzvahs. And then when the Yidden do what the Eibishter wants as the Eibishter wants, then the Eibishter says about us, you are my place of permanent residence. And in fact, embedded in that saying is almost, if you could say this kind of thing, that the Eibishter is saying, thanks to the Yidden, I am at, so to speak, at rest. And the reason for that is because we and the Eibishter are completely intertwined at our essence. How do we know that this has happened? And where will we see it? The Zohar tells us. The Eibishter sits on his throne, and he showers bracha and peace and cherishes the world. In other words, when you arrive at a reality where the world is not obstructive to us doing what we're meant to do to serve the Eibishter. To the contrary, the world is a place of bracha. The world is a place of peace. The world is a place that doesn't interfere with our godliness. A place that is suited, a place that is assistive to us doing what the Eibishter wants. Then the Eibishter says, this is this is my ultimate, so to speak, place of rest. Then it becomes clear to the whole world that we, the Jewish people, are the Eibishter's, so to speak, seat of presence. Because then we are able to manifest the ultimate purpose of creation, which is not simply that the Eibusha should be at home on our earth, but that the Eibusha should be at home within the Jewish people, which is the ultimate state of Dir B'Tachtonim. And now that we can take back to understanding even more profoundly what the Mishkan and the Bate Mikdash are about. Has pointed out, it's one continuum. The first step to creating this ultimate state was to make a Mishkan. Und sie ist Beufern, als die Bate Mikdashes bringen in und seinen Gönnen dem Inyan und dem Gilui und Binyan bei Ishashlishi. And the continuum works in such a way that the two Bate Mikdash are part of the process of creating eventually the manifestation of the third Beis HaMikdash. Now, going back to the Maimer Azal that's quoted at the beginning of this week's parasha, Remez leMikdash, that the Mishkan twice in the pasuk alludes to the Beis HaMikdash, Shenis Mashkein b'shnei churbanin al avenisem shel Yisrael, which was taken security away from us because of our debts, because of our averos. As the Umkehr von der Mikdash is nicht aber Sünde Sach für sich, na wie bei am Mashkein. So the fact that we'll get a Beis HaMikdash returned to us in the time of Mashiach is not is detached or independent of what happened in the two Bate Mikdash. That's how Mashkein works. Was der Mechumim von nehmen und halten am Mashkein ist zu versichern, als der Lebe wird abgeben dem Chayv von früher. The reason we take security is to guarantee the repayment of the loan that the debtor owes the creditor. In other words, so says, der Shenis Mashkein von dem Beis HaMikdash alle war Beis Gufa ist geirem und versichert, als ihnen sollen sich führen dabei. The Eibusha taking the Beis HaMikdash away from us is to ensure that we do what we're supposed to do, and the Rebbe Vetetzurikumen, which will allow us to have the Beis HaMikdash back. So it's not an unrelated thing. We behave badly, so to speak, and therefore the Beis HaMikdash was taken. But don't worry, one day we'll behave well again and then we'll get it back. No, it's taking away the Beis HaMikdash, which is the guarantee that we'll behave well, that we'll align with what Hashem wants and therefore get the Beis HaMikdash back. Now, once you consider that the mitzvah to make a home for Hashem, was das ist die mitzvah ledoiros, if boin der Mishkan va Beis HaMikdash is b'pshuta shemikra gezok yivar beneged the Mishkan, the simplest way that you understand that instruction of Asin Mikdash, although it also refers to the Bate Mikdash, but the simplest way to understand it in the pasuk is that it's referring to the Mishkan. Is moving as in the Mishkan Gufa Zayne da bedugma chen di drei nonim anal Mishkan Mikdash ba'is hashlishi. You have to be able to detect inside the Mishkan story itself these three themes, these three phases, one which is aligned with the Mishkan, one which is aligned with the Bate Mikdash, and one which is aligned with the Beis HaMikdash hashlishi. So where are we going to see that? In our parasha. In our Komas HaMishkan parasha, in our parasha, after it tells us that they completed all of the work that was required in order to make the Mishkan, there were also three phases, which implies three themes. First of all, there was this man from Komas HaMishkan v'shivos yimei hamiloyim. There were 7 days that Moshe Rabbeinu was erecting and dismantling the Mishkan consistently in order to inaugurate it into practice. Even though he put up the Mishkan, put the Aron inside, obviously, prior to that wasn't yet a Mishkan, didn't yet have an Aron. So everything that happened before the Shivos Yimei Hamiloim is prep work. But the Shivos Yimei Hamiloim were now actually functional Mishkan, even though it gets taken down every day. So yes, for 7 days of inaugurating the Mishkan is a Mishkan, but only for a few hours a day, because then Moshe takes it down again. So even though there was a particular formula, a certain regiment of rituals that they had to do in that week, they are not considered the regular avodah of the Kohanim. That's phase 1. The Mishkan itself in a temporary state. Then, Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the 8th day of the inauguration, is now the day that the Mishkan is erected permanently. Now it's up to stand. And now you could do the avodah of the Mishkan, not the avodah of initiating the Mishkan. Was der Chelek zwischen die zwei auf einer kommende Mishkan atzmai, ja schlimmer als es ist bedeutung sei heftig zwischen dem Mishkan, was das gewählt bei kam noch a protis für der Aaron, aber der Mishkan atzmai ist gewählt der Arai Oihel. So now these two phases, the Shivos Yimei Hamiloim is very similar to the Mishkan. The Mishkan is a temporary place which is primarily focused on the Aaron, as mentioned. That's the place where the Aaron is most permanently, but the Mishkan itself is Oyel Arai. So compared to that, that's like the Shivas and Me'amiloyim verses on Beis HaMikdash was given Adiras Keva, Mekoim, Menucha, Far Knesset Yisrael. Then from day 8 and on, you've got a more permanent version of the Mishkan, which is more similar to the Beis HaMikdash, a permanent structure for Hashem's home. But then there's a third phase. After that 8th day, when the Mishkan is now up and running, and they're actually doing the Avodah, only after that do we hear about the Eibush, the Shechina, arriving in the place. As it says towards the end of our parasha, that the Eibush's glory fills the Mishkan. And that's when people could see it with their own eyes. Here is the manifestation of divinity. That moment is a taste of what it's going to be like when we have the third Beis HaMikdash with Moshiach. Where the Eibush is going to reflect that pasuk of my permanent place of rest on the Jewish people. As the Sforno comments towards the end of our parasha, where it speaks about the cloud lifting up off the Mishkan. So the Sforno says the fact that the cloud had to lift in order for the Jewish people to move indicates that the Hashras Hashchina was absolute, that the Eibush was completely manifest in that space, and the only reason it would move, so to speak, out of the way is to allow the Jewish people to travel. He points out that is a unique version of divine manifestation that you did not see in Shiloh or in the Beit HaMikdash. So therefore we're linking it to a taste of the time of Mashiach. And like Rabbi Chizkiah said, when is that going to happen that we'll have this absolute manifestation of godliness in the third Beis HaMikdash when we're doing what the Eibishter wants? Well, in the context of the Mishkan, that's exactly what it is. How did this manifestation of the cloud of Hashem's Shechina happen? Because we did what we had to. We did the avodas that we had to. And now it's Aaron doing it, it's Aaron doing it, not Moshe Rabbeinu doing it. And that's when the Mishkan becomes what it is intended to be, testimony to the world, that this is a sign to the whole world that the Eibishter has now forgiven us for what we did with the Egel. What's the sign? That He's put His Shechina within us. So what does that mean to us? How do we experience even a glimpse of this? By learning about the Beis HaMikdash, or the Mishkan, the Mikdash Rishon v'Sheni Torah. So by learning about these things, the Gemara tells us, when we engage in learning about the Beis HaMikdash, the Eibishter considers it as if we're engaged with building the Beis HaMikdash. And we, by doing this, avoid the potential problem of Hashem complaining that everybody's neglected the construction of my house, which is mitzvahs. Okay, so learning Torah is the actual Torah learning. But by learning Torah, it's considered as if we're building the Beis HaMikdash. That represents mitzvahs. That's going to hasten the manifestation, the revelation of the third Beis HaMikdash that's going to come down from Shamayim. So then all of the things that the Beis HaMikdash and Mishkan is supposed to represent will be in its most absolute, most extreme form, most overt form. Shleimus HaTorah Menuchas HaAron. That's when we have the ultimate state of Torah, represented by the resting of the Aron. Shleimus Am Yisrael, the absolute integrity of the Jewish people, which is represented by Menuchosi from Knesset Yisrael, the rest of the Jewish people. And Hashem Kuchabrichu Shalom, like we know that the prophecy about the time of Moshiach is that the Eibishter's manifestation of the world will be complete, which is related to Rabbi Chizkiah's comment about the Eibishter saying, Zois Menuchosi Adiyad. And then it will be clear to the entire world that the Eibishter says, they, the Jewish people, are my absolute permanent resting place, the manifestation of the essence of Hashem. Nobody could deny it. Everybody will see it. In Mitzvah Hashem, we should see that. Teikef umiyad mamash.